Okay, welcome to the W3C call for the 27th of October, 2021. The agenda for this meeting is a little bit loose, as will be, for reasons that will become evident very shortly. The first topic for discussion is going to be actually how we deal with the technical details of membership going forward. And then actually reviewing the last W3C call we had and one of the implementation group calls. It seemed like there was a lot of terminological confusion in the membership document itself. I don't think there was any conceptual conclusion. I think it was really just about forms of words not being very clear. I think those terms got redefined kind of ad hoc in the document as we were talking. But I just wanted to do a sense check basically on some of the key terms in the document to make sure we're all talking about the same thing and arrive at a form of words that works for everybody on the call. And then we can add that into the document as a sort of definitions section right at the top, I think, just to maybe clarify for people what we're actually talking about in the proposal itself. So those are the only items on the agenda for myself. So hopefully if we don't get bogged down in definitional conversations, there'll be plenty of room for any other business that people might have. I'd also say, I think we did unpick some of these terms in previous calls, but I think it would be good to try to reframe them with a slightly wider variety of use cases, possibly, but we'll come to that shortly. So the housekeeping business is really, some of you, in fact, I think all of you at one point will have been in the implementation forum calls. And I think the consensus was in the last call that they were quite frustrating calls, the implementation forum calls especially. They were a little unstructured. They got into detail and it wasn't too clear what the context was. And so on and so forth. And in fact, that the whole conversation about membership in a way didn't fit terribly neatly into the implementation forum, that really what we're talking about with membership is not implementations, but what will be implemented. And we don't really have implementers on the ground right now to discuss in the implementation forums. So the proposal was to create a technical working group which would look at the membership proposal in detail. So this conversation, the W3C calls that happen on Wednesday, are for more high-level concerns. And the conversations scheduled on Thursdays will be the more detailed, technically oriented calls going through the document, the membership proposal itself, and in particular the technical appendices, which are all about API endpoints and what sort of verbs they can accept and so on. Those are currently scheduled for Thursdays, 1 to 2:30 weekly. So the idea is that we will be moving quite quickly to get a proposal ratified in such a form that it's readily comprehensible to outsiders by the end of Q4 this year, so by the end of the year. So that's the general shape of the meetings going forward. I'm just going to stop sharing for a moment so I can see my calendar. As discussed prior to the recording starting, I think Andrew Marshall and Andy Gordon were both missing from that invite to the Thursday meetings. Should I add both of you to it?
Yes, please.
Okay. I'm just going to do that right now. Oops. And of course, autocomplete is not really working for me at the moment, which is very annoying. Okay, I will add, I'll add Andy and Andrew after this call because I need to grab their addresses. Is there anybody on this call who does not want to be part of those more fine-grained discussions? Who should I remove from that invite list? Okay, so everyone's happy in principle to attend Thursday weekly meetings, although might not necessarily show up at all of them.
Is it worth, I mean, this might be a separate point, Tim, but is it worth also clarifying the Wednesday meetings in terms of whether the Wednesday is the intention that we're going to talk about anything membership related on the Wednesdays? Therefore, do membership people who are concerned primarily with the membership stuff need to attend the Wednesdays as well? Just thinking about making best use of everyone's time. Or is it that would be contained within the Thursday, therefore, unless there's a particular agenda that we put out in advance of the Wednesday that includes membership stuff, maybe they don't need to attend?
I think that's fair. Yeah, the Wednesday should be more about business level concerns. Yeah, so if you're not a developer, would you be interested, is I suppose the criterion that needs to be applied, you know, or is this more about business logic than it is about technical implementation? So if we get issues like that coming up in the membership document review, that will happen in the the Wednesday W3C meetings. If those issues are not encountered, then we can raise other issues that have arisen in the meantime, of which we have a plentiful supply. I mean, I would sorry, Nick.
Well, so to clarify, what's the expected attendance then for the Wednesday meeting in terms of the folks who are interested in memberships?
I don't think I understand the question. I mean, I would anticipate that it would be more non-technical stakeholders would get more value out of the Wednesday meetings. But I feel like that's sometimes a bit of an artificial distinction.
Right. I guess that's what I was wondering, whether is it worth us trying to just make sure because I think there are non-technical and technical stakeholders in attendance on the Thursday discussions as it stands. I suppose because, as you say, that a lot of the issues do bleed across both. All the discussions so far have certainly been like that. So I just wondered whether, for Wednesdays specifically, is it basically the case that membership people don't need to turn up on Wednesday unless we tell them specifically in advance to do so, or do they need to turn up on Wednesday just in case we cover something? That's what I'm driving at, I suppose.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the distinction is really level of generality, or level, what the implications are. And I think that's a judgment call that they just have to make. I mean, I think it's on me to create an agenda that reflects what we're actually going to be talking about and gives an accurate sense of what's going to be on there. But I think it's going to vary from organization to organization, whether the Wednesday call is something that developers go to or whether it's something that executives go to. I guess it sort of depends on the organization. I find it a little hard to predict.
I think this comes out of the terms, which is on, I see as the last point or point 3 on the agenda for today. If I'm reading that as kind of terms of reference, if I'm misinterpreting what that means, then do correct me. But I think if what the technical working group is being tasked with doing will dictate who should be going to it. Certainly in my imagining, it will be working towards a detailed proposal, taking into account predominantly the needs of the people who are working on this stuff right now. And there's a degree to which the W3C community as a whole should be both questioning and supporting that to shape it, to work out the degree to which it fits into and how it fits into the wider questions of what the standard does. And I think that'll probably dictate or probably give the strongest hint to who should be there. So there's going to be, I'd expect the technical working group to have by nature a more technical focus. So I expect it to be predominantly developers and technical stakeholders. And then I'd expect this Wednesday call to have more of a more general focus on it. Possibly, though, sending people back with commentary on questions on the implications of things that have been discussed. Does that help? So that's my imagine.
I think probably part of the complexity is that the developers, in inverted commas, the people discussing stuff on Thursday are not kind of we're not talking about whether it's a put or a get request. The meat of the conversation is how should this type of functionality work, or where does this type of it's really the intersection between business and technical, which is where the complexity is more than it is, and everyone kind of wrestling with various concepts around that, rather than it being what name should we call this term type conversation, which might be in there somewhere, but that's I guess that's what I was pointing at more. That seems to be what that discussion's been so far. I imagine that will be what it probably becomes as we go through the rest of the features in there. But maybe we all like looking at. I feel like we're all holding little bits of the elephant and not really sure what the animal looks like.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe the two separate groups are trying to answer different questions. Maybe I feel like this is maybe just adding another elephant piece to the pile. That turned gruesome. Anyway, I think the question that the technical working group is answering is, how do we specify this enough so that somebody can implement it? I think that's the question that the technical group has to answer, and the W3C group has to answer, is this functionality that stakeholders actually want to support and can support within their systems? With a further eye on, is this functionality that can generally be implemented? So it's a wider question. Are we representing the sector's interests as a whole by codifying this functionality as a part of OpenActive? You seem perplexed, Nick.
So I'm just trying to really understand concretely what that means. So are we saying that for example, we'll be talking about the different ways that one might create a member and what the auth flow looks like, and what fields are going to be in there in terms of the what creating a member requires in the Thursday conversations. And then is it that in the Wednesday we have a kind of high level summary where we just say this is what we talked about on Thursday, and that, or is Wednesday literally we're creating members, and that's the level, it's requirements level almost, rather than more than that. I guess I'm not sure what the Wednesday conversations are for. That's the bit I'm missing. What actually concretely will be discussed? But maybe that'll come out. Maybe I'm trying to save people time. It'll become self-evident. So maybe we just crack on and see what we end up talking about on Wednesdays and Thursdays, and then people can choose to attend or not as we get into it.
I think the problem is that for some organizations those questions are the same, and for other organizations they're very different. So if we look at where the whole split came from, in a sense, was some organizations saying, we understand that OpenActive has got a bunch of requirements. We don't really know what they are. There are a lot of developers engaged in feeding into them, and this process is something we don't really understand or have oversight of. And I don't think the concern that was being expressed there was, I feel like the API endpoints are awkwardly named. I think it was much more like, this does not suit our business model, or this, this is functionality that our systems don't support. Do we have to implement it to be OpenActive compliant? Those kinds of questions. And so I think and this has already come up in some of the W3C / implementation forum groups, where some of the systems actually don't implement functionality that is specified as being possible under the membership proposal. So I would think of the conversation about, how do we get user information? Why are we maintaining a separate endpoint just for user information? What are the limitations of, Azure platforms and so on and so forth here? That's for the Thursday conversation. The Wednesday conversation is more, well, actually, our system doesn't expose that kind of information about users, or we have security concerns about exposing this kind of information. that would be more of a Wednesday kind of conversation, I think.
I mean, like I said, maybe I'm trying to oversimplify this before we get into it, but I wonder if it's possible to condense both of those conversations, which will be likely the same people, from what I understand, engaged in those conversations, into the same call, so that we can move between both parts of that. Because I don't know if we're going to be covering the same topics twice, basically with the same group, and that might not be as efficient. That's what I guess. But
yeah, I mean, I feel like it's a Scylla and a Charybdis. Like, I feel like, yeah, on the one hand, we have all of the conversations twice, because yeah, the same people are involved. I think the other pole, however, is we end up having conversations in the Thursday group that are happening independently of the realities of the Wednesday group. And I think it's on organizations to communicate up the chain that there are people that need to be on the Wednesday call that aren't engaged in the Thursday call. That, you know, a large organization can say, okay, hold on, actually, you know, does this make commercial sense for us? Or is this something that we need to address elsewhere? Because, you know, I think equally, we don't want a decision maker sitting there thinking, I really have to be here because they're talking about security and I'm very worried about my system security. And then everybody starts talking in a very detailed technical sense. And then they lose interest and feel disoriented and feel like they are not in a position to comment, in fact, because most of the conversation has been in a level of detail that sort of eludes them, because, you know, they're not developers. So I think that's the risk that needs to be avoided or, you know, I'm not too sure how to navigate that. But yeah, between having the same conversation twice and talking past people who actually do need to be in the conversation, I think that's the tricky issue.
So is it then that on the Thursdays we raise higher level things that maybe senior more business or senior level stakeholders might want to engage with if we come to a kind of crossroads, or there's something that seems like it's worth flagging, and then that becomes a Wednesday agenda, and then we flag in the group, we flag our respective senior folks if they need to engage in that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. If something comes out on a Thursday that looks like it needs intervention, yeah.
Sure. So I guess so I'm clear then that what that means is, for example, we might then have like almost like an escalation conversation on Thursday, not escalation, but, you know, like on Wednesday. Yeah. It's like we need so therefore those conversations should be put on the agenda in advance. Therefore, we should know what they are, and people then don't need to attend the Wednesday unless we put something like that on the agenda. And then actually we need to probably make sure that the right people can see those particular concerns, because they might be something that you know, affect people in a way that is like a bigger deal.
Yeah. I think pragmatically that's right. That's how that goes. I mean, I think there's a larger question also about actually what is the standard for, and ideally the standard isn't just for the organizations that are there. We're designing more broadly than that. So I suppose there's also a duty on the Wednesday group, I think, to think more broadly about other stakeholders who might want to come into the ecosystem, and is this something that they should do? And again, that's maybe something where it's not so important that, you know, that there's an executive developer kind of split, although decision makers might be better positioned to feed into that process. But I think Wednesday would also be a good place to be saying, okay, actually, what are the wider implications of this? You know, is this something that is useful specifically for MCR Active, something that's useful specifically for Legend and Gladstone, or is this something that is actually useful, you know, more broadly, you know?
And I guess we should be keeping that in mind on Thursday anyway, I imagine, in terms of as we go through the detail of it. But we're not just designing on Thursday for a small set of organizations, we're designing as a standard for broad purposes.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, and I mean, hopefully on Thursday, you know, when we're getting into the details, you know, it shouldn't be, if it becomes very architectural, then yeah, that becomes a kind of a Wednesday conversation, because you can imagine systems that have got very different architectures and therefore would find it hard to integrate with OpenActive. You know, but yeah, if it's about particular sequences of calls, or particular, a particular syntax or whatever. Yeah, presumably that's not going to be posing a problem to other organizations. It's not sort of interest outside of it, out of a narrowly technical concern. So
there's probably also questions of scope. Like I've only been in the membership conversations a little bit, but there are multiple objects being discussed, and they speak to multiple different areas that may or may not be in scope for it. And someone talks about the concerns around, I had the word safeguarding pop up in the last one, around who can access whose account. And obviously that is a key thing. It'll probably, there'll be implementation specific things around members as objects in a database, but there'll probably also be considerations around people and the situations they might be in that could affect those. That one just stuck out to me because I do youthly stuff, but it's that's something that I could imagine getting raised across both as a there's a group going, well, we can't actually resolve this. This isn't on us to resolve. There's something we need more feedback on. Should this even be something we should consider, or does it just get attached as a caveat that we haven't considered that? I feel like that's the kind of thing that would then get escalated, or I'm trying to avoid the word escalated, raised on a Wednesday.
So we've heard a lot from Tim, Rob, and Nick. I mean, is this a division that makes sense to other people? It's a little bit fuzzy. Do we think we can navigate with this?
Tim, it kind of makes sense to me, but it was my intention to go to both sets of meetings and just see which one was most relevant to me, the one I could contribute to. And I have no technical background whatsoever, so I can't get involved in any technical discussions. So therefore, it'd be waste of my time. But certainly in business requirements and an operational interpretation of those, I might be able to contribute.
Okay, yeah. So in my perfect world, those all happen on a Wednesday, and you've got a Thursday free.
Yeah, I was going to say, but I wonder whether it's worth us trying one Thursday first, because my sense is when we read, we'll get three lines into Thursday's conversation. It will be a business requirements conversation. That's how it's gone so far. So yeah, I see. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose that points to, or does that point to a wider problem then, actually, because I feel like if we're having such a hard time articulating this split and then discussing one separately from the other, I feel like schematically, ideally, you'd have requirements first. And you go, okay, we all agree on the requirements, which we sort of did, 4 weeks ago, I think. And then the technical stuff would fall out of that. And of course, there's always, some kind of feedback loop whereby a technical obstacle means you have to rethink what your requirements are and how they're prioritized. But if we're continually iterating between requirements and implementation, that feels like it's a problem.
Can't we just try and break it down? So if we were to start scratch now, I know we're not going to start scratch, but you take the documents that you've got and you say, right, this is the first Wednesday, as an example. On this Wednesday, we're going to review this part with the business decision makers. And I've just asked Tim, based on that conversation that we've just had there, that Dave is also invited to the Wednesday one. So we say on this Wednesday, we are going to discuss this particular element. The decisions are made about that particular element on a Wednesday. Then on a Thursday, we discuss the same element, but the technical parts of that same element. And if anything comes out of the Thursday that needs a decision to be made, it has to go back into the following Wednesday. But at least you've got a working flow. And then you could structure your meetings so that, I don't know, for the next 4 weeks, we know exactly which part of the project that we are discussing within that week. Just a suggestion.
Yeah, it makes sense. I think in a way that had been my first thought was like, we'll just kind of, plod through the document essentially at whatever speed is appropriate. I think that I think actually we've largely done that work, come to think of it. I think we made it up to the appendices almost, and then the appendices really are technical, I think. I think there will be things that come out of them that do have a business level implications, but the terms of the discussion in the appendices are going to have to start by being technical. I think what I'll say to that, Debbie, is I'll think about that, because there's a couple of different ways of going about it. One would be to go through the document more or less in sequence, and I think it's a well-structured document, so that is a sensible procedure. But the other one would be to pull out particular issues from the document and say we're talking about this issue identified from the document, and we'll have some sort of debug board to say, okay, this issue, then this issue, then this issue. It will be a GitHub project or something, and to go about it that way. And I think your feeling in the implementation forum last week was that we were kind of talking about everything all the time. Is that a fair characterization?
It just feels like there was no structure to it.
Right.
It felt like we're coming to a meeting each week and we don't actually know what part we're going to be discussing. So I've got nothing to focus on, and we're all busy doing everything else outside of this, and then we just have to jump into this at a random point in the document and try and catch up and understand what we're talking about. Me personally, my brain doesn't work like that. I need some sort of order.
Okay, I think maybe it's just a question of more clearly, just articulating more clearly in the agenda, like, okay, we're doing these pages, this section. Because what makes me unhappy about looking at it from an issue standpoint is that somebody has to do that work of identifying the issues, which would be probably me in the first instance. And it sort of presupposes that you know what an issue looks like, and actually, and that you can make that distinction between like, oh, this is a business model problem, this is a technical problem. And that's actually the pointed issue.
One potential approach is that we could take a thematic approach and go through. We've already got numbers of I think there's 8 or something, different headings in the main document, and then the appendices obviously talk to each one of those in various ways. So it could be that we could send out in advance that section 1, the relevant appendices are, A2, B3 and 4 and C1. And then we cover that whole strand as a all the way from the requirement, which I guess is that one at the top, through the various technical details that underpin it. So
okay, thanks. That's a nice idea, actually. Yeah. So we do this section. Wednesday will be sort of, here's a section 2. Thursday can be appendices related to section 2. And then if we need to revisit that, revisit section 2, for example, then at the next higher level W3C call, because of details that fall out of it, then we do that, and otherwise we just proceed onwards. That seems like a fairly clear way to proceed. And then in terms of, then I guess that makes the document is the high level document, and issues can be pulled out with confidence out of the appendices, really, and that can be a technical discussion that happens on GitHub for people who are into that kind of conversation.
Yeah, and in terms of scheduling, I guess we've got 8 weeks and there's 8 sections, so that's one every Thursday, if that was right, or maybe 7 weeks actually. Sorry,
Stephen, I feel like you're looking like
I was just going to comment, but I was just reflecting on Nick's comment just then as well. It also strikes me that just changing the tack just very slightly is that if we are discussing business requirements, then you've only got really 2 businesses who are actually contributing to those requirements. And that seems to be GLL and everyone active. It's not a particularly wide scope if you're trying to get a broad brush of requirements to fit a standard.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair comment. And we talked to the software vendors as well, but it's difficult because I think in a way what I'd like to see would be a sort of thought exercise about, yeah, who else can use this standard, and really an entirely different use case. You know, if we could imagine what, say, a private sector aggregator would do, you know, a broker who is interested just in offering, I don't know, discounted classes or something across a range of providers. Nobody in this room has that kind of business. But if we could think about whether somebody who did have that kind of business could pick up and run with this sort of model, I think that's a useful thought exercise to attempt.
Yeah, it's also worth saying that I know we covered it in the first meeting, and I think Claire was kind of a bit sensitive to it because she said we scope creeping here by taking on too much. But I think the response to that was no, it's just looking at different use cases that allow the same technology to be used in different ways. So it's not scope creep as much as it is just making sure we consider all the different options. So I know that original requirements doc does include some stuff from, for example, Playfinder, which is a kind of the idea of using it to upsell memberships within the Playfinder experience. And I've actually got to raise somewhere, I don't know which the appropriate forum is, but there's a link to schools as well that might be useful that we can pick up on. So there's a couple, and then there's also the third, which we haven't actually got an organization representing, which is a more general requirement around where using memberships within a kind of motivational app or website that you're using to track your fitness. You might want to be able to book your memberships through that app as well. That's the use cases that currently are in the documentation.
Okay. Well, it might be, yeah, I suppose this is again about agenda setting for the W3C calls or the Wednesday calls. That, yeah, trying to think at a high level is the purview of the Wednesday calls, and to some extent that needs to be addressed explicitly in the agenda. Okay, sorry, I'm afraid we've managed to spend 43 minutes on logistics of further calls, which I am ashamed of. But I hope we've got to a good place for it, and we've got a good structure to move ahead. And given that we're going to be meeting weekly in the technical group, I suppose that means we can get quite a bit done once we're out of the blocks in that way. Any further comments on meetings? Well, I'll just throw in, please do send me other people in your organizations that should be invited to the meetings if they're not already on the list. Debbie's messaged me with one suggestion, and I'd certainly welcome more. Sorry, you're hearing Harry Potter being read downstairs. Okay, so that's meetings and agendas hopefully dealt with for the moment. We'll find our way starting 2 weeks hence. So the other point I think it would be worth talking about briefly, and I think we might have already covered this in a previous call. I just want to verify that this is the case. And to Stephen's earlier point, it would be useful to have more organizations here. I think there are some language problems in the document, in the proposal. And the one that keeps on coming up is, what are we talking about when we mean membership? Because it feels like the word membership in itself is not terribly good for the membership proposal. And then there's the memberships on the broker side, and there's memberships on the booking system side. And I was wondering if we could come up ideally with 3 terms, one to capture each of those and one that captures both. And it could be that, you know, membership is the umbrella term, but then what do we call, how do we make that distinction between broker and booking side memberships? And Nick, I feel like you must have a suggestion here.
That's why we've used entitlements as the kind of in the proposal. That's why that term ended up. I think it was Eugene from used to be Active Westminster that coined that, well, not coined it, but suggested we use that term for this purpose. And the reason I think he suggested that was because memberships was loaded with lots of different meanings, whereas entitlement seems a little bit more. Yeah, it doesn't. I don't know if any systems have entitlement in their current vocabularies.
Okay, so entitlements applies to
Yeah,
broker.
we do, Nick. We use entitlement.
Oh no. Oh,
But
Steve.
of course, entitlement has a different meaning in our systems, because entitlement means what comes with your membership, i.e. free swimming, free gym, one squash court per week, that type of thing. That's an entitlement.
Yeah.
That's how we use it.
Yeah, it's got a number of guises within the leisure industry. I've come across many of those in the 25 years I've been working in the industry.
Yeah. Mm.
So benefits, packages, membership, subscriptions, it's much of all the same thing.
Okay.
Right.
We're-
Thesaurus.
Yeah, and for me, coming at it from a sort of American English side, I was like, whoa, this is a legal term. What's going on?
yeah.
So what we were trying to capture there was the idea that a broker side membership entitled you to certain discounts, I guess, was what the force of that suggestion was.
We're moving to a position where we're kind of not necessarily doing away with memberships, but we're doing away with memberships in the traditional sense of looking at a membership, because we're moving away to the customer being the single entity, and the customer can have multiple services, of which a membership can be one of them, and other services can apply. But nevertheless, membership, either a paid in advance or a pay-as-you-go membership, can be added as a service to a customer record. That's how we're approaching it.
Yeah, it's like bolt-ons, isn't it, Stephen? Bolt-ons to a core membership.
It's a little bit, it's a little bit like a bolt-on. Traditionally, we've looked at bolt-ons to memberships, haven't we? But nevertheless, it's a bit like a bolt-on. You've got the single entity, which is the constant, and then all the other services come and go as and when the customer wants them or doesn't want them, which can be a membership.
Okay, so that's interesting. So what we're actually talking about here in terms of the proposal is it's actually just identification. It's just knowing that the person at the one end of the broker is the same person that you've got in your system, and it doesn't necessarily relate to the concept of a membership.
Well, in essence, if you look at what we're doing with regards to the Manchester contract, within the leisure environment at the moment, let's say with everyone active as an example, they have their own packages that their members join at this moment in time. The same within Greenwich Leisure itself. Then what you've got are the, if you like, the pay-as-you-go people who live in borough, out of borough, and those sorts of things. And that local authority offers a form of a discount if you live in borough or out of borough, whichever. And it's a case of recognizing that within the leisure management system to get the benefit of having that bolt-on, as if you like, or entitlement, so that when they come through seamlessly through the doors, or online, they purchase it seamlessly because it knows who they are and then what they're going to get as a form of a price. The difficulty, I think, we've been experiencing, that we've been talking around a lot, is this whole area of trying to link up the availability with the unknown entity. But then you've got the member piece now, but unless you identify yourself, how do you know actually what rate you've got? You can show them all, but which one is theirs?
Okay, so
sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead, Nathan.
I think you're right, Tim, in that it very much feels like an identification problem rather than any other kind of term, because we're essentially just trying to identify who the customer is and then letting the booking system handle that in any way they see fit, which obviously is going to be very much kind of like business specific.
So I don't know if that's quite, well, I don't know if we're talking about the same problem. That's my question. When we say it feels like an identification problem, what does? So there's a list of entitlements that you can actually allocate to a person. So you literally say this person is a MCR active adult or a Westminster concession adult as a thing, and that level, you only get a Westminster concession adult if you've gone through the approval process to show your various documentation, and then you qualify for that level of a thing, which is what they call, is related to subscriptions in the Gladstone system. And
I think it's any system that, to be honest with you, whether it's Legend or whatever it is, they've got a different name for it, but ultimately it's a package that they've got. I think the challenge that's being faced currently here, I think there's two aspects to it. There's once you've actually identified who you are, that's seamless. That's not a problem, because then when you authenticate in, it knows who you are. You select, can I make that booking? Yes, you can. There's your price. That all's fine. I think the complicating factor is the bit prior to that, in the availability feed, where there's this sense of we need to identify what the price they could be having, but we're not saying who they are at that stage.
So yeah, so we've got an individual. That individual belongs to many possible classes, I suppose.
Not even at that level, Tim. We're talking about they literally go in and they see this availability, and there's a requirement that you need to pull through the entitlement. But the entitlement isn't known to that individual because they're anonymous. They're a guest at that stage until they log in and identify themselves. So it's to trying to identify what those different bands are or entitlements are to the unknown person who's who's browsed onto the website.
Okay, so this is a problem of associating an individual with a number of entitlements. So you've got sort of a one-to-many relationship, I guess, there. You've got one individual who could have many possible entitlements. And then you need some way of communicating who that individual is to the booking system. And then knowledge about what entitlements correspond to what price needs to be made in the broker.
For that specific broker, yes.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So the booking system needs to know what possible entitlements exist. The broker needs to associate specific entitlements with an individual, and then that individual needs to be identified by the broker on the booking system.
Well, again, there's two aspects. There's the guest route and the registered user route. The registered user route isn't a problem because they'll actually identify themselves, they'll log in, then they'll get their relevant prices. It's the requirement whereby them saying is we're being asked, the challenge is to show all the entitlements to this unknown person. So in other words, you're basically showing that person, well, if you're an adult, if you're a junior, if you're a concession, if you're something else, these are the possible permutations you could have.
Yeah, I'm just wheeling back to the nomenclature a little bit, to what names we assign to this. Yeah, it feels like it's like broker personal identity. It's like personal identity is what's communicated between the broker and the booking system. The broker.
So, sorry, the personal identity team. That's what we currently have as in there as the customer account.
Right. Okay.
That notion of the, it's not actually even a person because that person might have multiple accounts. So calling it customer account as a, like, this is the account of the customer rather than the seller account or another type of account. So so identifying the current customer account is one thing, and then there's the entitlement / membership / subscription, as you pointed out, is the other thing.
Right. Okay. So it's broker customer account, booking system customer account. And then the, sorry, totally lost my train of thought. So you've got customer accounts on each system, essentially. You need to align them. And then associating the customer account with particular entitlements is a separate operation, really conducted by the broker. So then what we really need is a way of disambiguating broker customer accounts from booking system customer accounts, so we can talk about them separately and be clear which one we're talking about at any time. Is that fine? Can we just say, should we just say broker customer account and booking system customer account? Feels a bit cumbersome, but maybe that's the best we can do.
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm not talking on behalf of everyone active here. I think there isn't a challenge once the person is logged in and identified themselves, because then the entitlement comes through. It knows what they're entitled to. It knows what the bolt-on package is, what the price is. Can they purchase it? Can't they purchase it? I think the challenge is, and this is, I'm not saying it's muddying the water, there's an additional requirement here that's maybe outside of this membership piece, but there has to be an extension to the data feed for the end user to see what potentially is available first and to pull through all those relevant prices specifically for that broker.
It's allowing the price for the entitlement to be visible at the browse stage of the
To somebody who's unknown.
Yeah.
Right. And I thought the requirement that we'd already agreed upon was that that would be true in the majority of cases. That assuming there was a simplified enough pricing structure that we could account for almost every case was sufficient, and that we were happy to leave some edge cases unanswered. So it should be possible as soon as you've logged in.
Yeah, that's the point. If you log in, yes, no problem at all. It's the anonymous data feed.
Sorry, if you log in on the broker, not on the booking system. So therefore anonymous to the booking system, known to the broker.
So therefore you're identifying yourself through the broker. So they will know what they are. So when they consume the data feed.
So the issue being that the open data feed, all the open data feeds are open, and the searches that are happening are across a number of organizations. All those organizations have their feeds, and those organizational feeds are not individual specific to, they're not specific to any individual. So if you search Manchester for or anywhere, UK-wide search for a particular type of activity, you'll find yoga classes from lots of different booking systems, including those classes that are from a system that has a membership scheme. And so in order to make sure you have accurate prices in that feed for those that have a membership scheme, that's the reason that that's what we when we say the browse stage, that's the browse stage. You're anonymous because you're using the using the open feeds and doing a search across lots of systems. So you can't log into Gladstone at that stage because you don't necessarily know that Gladstone's even the option in the search results that's going to be selected, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, but again, I mean, we are working through this challenge currently at this moment in time. We are in conversation with Nick. Let's just clarify, it's not that we're not doing it. It's just raising the point that there's a bit of a, not an undertone, that's the wrong phrase, but there's an underlying that the data needs to be there in the first place, but that's what causes the complication. Because this is an additional requirement outside, in theory, of the actual membership process. It's an additional requirement to the availability feed. That's the challenge we've got at the moment, whereby we're seeing that they recognise themselves within the portal, but at that point there's still no integration at that stage, apart from looking at an open data feed. There's no integration at that point with regards to recognise who is that person and what is their entitlement. It's all this person will be shown, here are the prices, what they could be. And it's the value of, we can show prices. We can show prices at that stage, but do they have to be specifically toned down to that specific price based upon the entitlement of somebody who's not actually known at that time because they haven't actually authenticated at that stage with the broker? Oh, sorry, not with the broker, with the booking system.
Is this a good point to pick that up on the next Thursday call? I wonder, just to kind of bottom out and then when we kind of boil it down to a business requirement.
I don't know, Nick, because it seems to be it's a conversation between ourselves, everyone active, and you. From what we're saying, what we're hearing is that Greenwich and their solution has this already. So I don't want to muddy the water with a conversation that takes Stephen and his team through something that they've got already. So that's why we'll continue those conversations outside of this forum.
Sorry, I'm with you. I'm sorry, Andy. I thought you were raising the requirement more broadly. That's all.
I'm just querying and questioning. How much of a must-have this be through to the data feed, which is a separate requirement in comparison to the actual showing something through the broker through to the booking outside of the booking system.
I think let's take this because I'm afraid we're at the top of the hour. Let's take this to the implementation forum chat on Slack. Does that work for you, Andy?
It's not Slack. Slack is something I've not actually used before, but willing to give it a go if necessary.
Yeah, let me invite that to you, because I think this is a useful conversation. It would be useful to have it sort of documented somewhere, and Slack sort of does that. And yeah, we can surface this on a Wednesday or Thursday group call as appropriate, I think. Yeah, because we're not going to solve this right now, unfortunately. Okay, thank you for the time. I think I think this pointed to the idea that actually we do need to resolve these terms, since it sort of opened up its own nest of issues, which I think did elicit some requirements nicely. So let's revisit this again, possibly on Slack. People who are not in Slack, I will get you on there, and yeah, Andy, I'll ping you specifically.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone, for joining. Thank you for sticking around for the extra 2 minutes, and see you Wednesday or Thursday as appropriate. Okay, thanks a lot.
See you later.
Thanks all. Bye.